Hello, everyone. It's Michael Shermer, and it's time for another episode of The Michael Shermer Show. This one is brought to you by Brilliant. You can access and read about Brilliant at brilliant.org. And if you go to brilliant.org/skeptic, you get a 30-day free trial, and the first 200 of you will get 20% off your annual subscription in addition to the 30-day free trial. Why would you want to do this? Because Brilliant is the online platform that presents short courses crafted by award-winning teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, Google, and more. For example, you can just touch the app on your phone. It opens right up to a bunch of different courses that you can take. For example, there's courses on college science classes, including those on scientific thinking, classical mechanics, electricity and magnetism, quantum objects, quantum computing, chemical reaction, and computational biology. And that's just in one category. Under statistics and finance, you can take courses in probabilities and statistics, applied probability, random variables, and my favorite, casino probability. And if you or your children need refreshers for that upcoming SAT or any of the other prep courses that you have to take for like the GRE, you can do it right here on Brilliant. You can bone up on algebra fundamentals, algebra 1 and 2, geometry fundamentals, geometry 1 and 2, and probabilities and statistics, which I think is one of the most important things you could study. For example, under statistics, probability statistics, you just touch on that app. I got one here that pops up. Statistics fundamentals. Here's an introduction. You just touch on the app here. What do I want to look at? Okay. How about deception? That's a good one. Let's see what some of the problems are of how deception is employed using statistics. Statistics are a powerful tool because it uses data to convey important information. This information may be visualized as a graph, chart, or table. It might be given numerically as the mean, medium, or mode, or the percent change, right? Well, we all know how easy that is to distort by just using distorting numbers on the axes, okay? So let's just see some examples here, like, right? United States medium home price. So they show a graph like that. And how to interpret that, right? What can we conclude about home prices in the United States? The median home price tripled from March 2009 to January 2011, right? Or the median home price increased by $50,000, which looks to be the right one. Or the median home price increased at a constant rate. Okay, so let's just try number 2, all right? And submit that. And I got it correct. Yay. There's hope for me yet. And then you hit continue, and it gives you an explanation and then another one about probabilities and statistics regarding playing cards, right? So that's the kind of thing. It's interactive. We know from studies in cognitive psychology on learning that people learn much better in short chunks that they interact with. They have to give feedback. They have to be part of the process rather than just sitting at a desk in a classroom listening to some college professor like me ramble on at the chalkboard, right? So check it out, brilliant.org/skeptic to get your 30-day free trial, and the first 200 of you, 20% discount off of that first annual subscription. Why would you not want to do this? It's a fabulous way to learn. Online content, it is so exciting. Check it out, brilliant.org/skeptic. All right, thanks for listening. Just to remind you, I'm the publisher of Skeptic Magazine. Your support through the Skeptic Society, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, is deeply appreciated. It supports the podcast, the magazine, the Skeptic column, and all the media stuff we do. You can go to skeptic.com/donate. Go to skeptic.com and just click into the magazine and order our latest issue on economic matters, which is applicable for today's guest, which I'll introduce in just a moment. And speaking of which, we actually did an issue of Skeptic. Check this out, Kelly, on Ponzi schemes and why people fall for them. There's the original eponymous Charles Ponzi, after which we published that during the Bernie Madoff thing. All right, my guest today is, give her a proper introduction here. I like the longer about the author that's provided in the book instead of the jacket flap. It's always good to look for that. Kelly Richmond Pope is the Dr. Barry J. Epstein Endowed Professor of Forensic Accounting in the School of Accountancy and MIS at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois, where she teaches forensic accounting and managerial accounting. She's also the Institute of Management Accountants, IMA Research Fellow, leading research projects in corporate governance, ethics, and fraud. She's the co-author of ABCs of Behavioral Forensics, applying psychology to financial fraud prevention and detection in managerial accounting. My old job. No. In 2020, Pope is recognized as one of the top 25 female leaders in accounting profession, with the Most Powerful Women in Accounting Award given by the American Institute of Certified Public Association and CPA Practice Advisors. Pope is director and producer of the award-winning documentary All the Queen's Horses, which explores the largest municipal fraud in U.S. history. And she has appeared on numerous true crime shows such as CNBC's Super Heist and VH1's My True Crime Story, and on media outlets such as WGN-TV and the BBC. Here's the new book, Fool Me Once, which of course comes from the mangled quote from W. Fool me once, shame on, fool me, you can't get fooled again. And at this point,
he tried.
At this point, you cue up the Who, won't get fooled again. Kelly, thanks for coming on. It's so nice to talk to you.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, so I watched the documentary. For my listeners, just type in all the Queen's Horses and you'll find it in YouTube or Netflix or wherever. Actually, I think it was on Amazon. Yeah, Amazon Prime. Yeah. So that was a gripping story. Oh my God, that was just so astonishing. How long she pulled this off for. And but before we get into that, and that's just one chapter in this book, which documents lots and lots of corporate fraud, financial fraud, and scams and things like that. How did you intersect into that from just being kind of a normal accounting person and professor?
Well, I teach a graduate forensic accounting class, and I always look for those amazing cases and stories that just feel unbelievable, but so simple. And so when that crime was exposed in the Chicago Tribune, I was like, this is crazy. Like, where is Dixon? How did this happen? What's the environment that let a person think that they could get away with something like this for so long? And I started going to Dixon and doing interviews. And so the rest is history. But I feel like I get all of my superpowers from the classroom because it makes you better at everything you do. You have to be creative. You have to be nice and kind. You have to be thoughtful. And all of those things, I think, help you in other areas of your life. So I get my strength from the classroom. Nice.
I think probably most of our readers here are familiar with the big scams, like the Bernie Madoff types, or the what's his name? Sam
Bankman-Fried and FTX.
Sam Bankman-Fried. Yes. Got to get those initials right. But I was astonished in reading your book that $1 trillion industry, and I had no idea there was all this kind of small background noise type fraud that goes on. Just stuff that probably no one ever, it doesn't even get reported, right? I mean, people that steal a couple $100 here and there.
You think about fraud being like a cancer. Very few people are diagnosed at stage 4. It started somewhere. So It starts at 1 or 2, and then it grows and grows and grows and grows and goes unignored for a long time. So fraud sort of works the same way. And one of the things that I want readers to understand is that most of our interactions are going to be with these small to medium-sized frauds. Very few of us. I mean, I hope you reach it to the point where you need a Madoff in your life. That would be great. But most of us are not going to reach that. Most of us are dealing with a financial advisor or a bookkeeper or a lawyer or somebody that's just part of the day-to-day functions of a working adult. And those, to me, are the kinds of frauds that we have to identify with, because the Madoff's cases in the world allow us to say, oh, look at that over there. That would never happen to me. It's interesting, but that would never be me. So we need to realize that this is us, and we need to know how it affects us.
So part of your work is to alert employers that this kind of background, smallish fraud can be going on, and you might not even know it. The person can seem totally trustworthy. Maybe they take $100 a month or $1,000 a month or something. It's just depending on the size of your company, you probably wouldn't notice it.
That's true. And I want companies, organizations to think about what types of environments that they create to not only put pressure on employees, but if they did have something to tell you, how would they report it? Are you creating a mechanism for them to even share that information if they wanted to? So that's another point that I wanted to make with the book.
Yeah. So the subtitle is Scam Stories and Secrets from the $1 Trillion Fraud Industry. It's nicely organized, so we can use that as a nice outline for the conversation. That there are three categories of people here: perpetrators, prey, the victims, and then the whistleblowers. But even there, I had no idea. I hadn't really thought about any of this too deeply. Just within perpetrators, there's three different types in your classification system: intentional perps, accidental perps, righteous perps, and then in prey, there's innocent bystanders and organizational targets. And then within whistleblowers, there's accidental, noble, and vigilante. I have a good story for you on that one. So let's just start with the perps. Who's likely to do this and why do they do it? I guess there's at least three different categories of why they do it, other than the money, obviously.
So I think what's interesting is starting with the perps. It really depends on what type of perp you are that might impact why you do what you do. So intentional perps are a little different because they are what movies are made of. So those are your Madoffs of the world, your Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world. So let's put them aside because they are just out for greed. They know the loopholes, they can exploit them, and they receive personal gain from that. But it's these other two categories that don't always register as perpetrators because their motivation might be, I'm just following the boss's orders. I'm a team player. I'm a people pleaser. If someone asks me to do something, I'm going to do it just because I want to keep everything moving smoothly. I might feel a little bad about it, but it's probably not illegal. And if it was, somebody will protect me. It's not going to be as bad as I think it is. That's the accidental perpetrator. And then the righteous perpetrator tends to be somebody that is more senior in an organization. So they have a level of power and privilege within an organization. And they are use their internal resources to help someone externally. So sometimes they feel as though they're helping, like my company has plenty of money. There's tons of resources. I can help this startup. I can just get them through the loan process. I can get them here because they'll make it. It'll all wash out in the end, and they'll get to the point that they need to be. So they'll be successful. They just need a little bump, and I'm going to give them that bump. That's the righteous perpetrator. So I think the motivation really is dependent upon who you are.
Right. So with the intentional perps, you mentioned Madoff. Is it possible? I don't know that much about the case in detail that he started off totally legitimately, and then
I think at some point in the early days there was some validity to the investments that Madoff was making, but there's a lot of us don't like to fail, and we don't want to fail publicly. And a lot of us are fixers. So, and we're very optimistic. So something is going wrong, something is going bad, and we're like, you know what? It's going to recover soon. If I just give it a little time, it'll get better. I know it will. I can help this. I can make this. And so I think when those things did not happen, that's when things went south. So I do believe, just from my understanding of the case, that there was at the very beginning, at the early days, there was some validity to the transactions of Madoff's transactions.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And then he fell behind a little bit and decided to, nudge the system. And then, I'll just do this for a little while, and then I'll, like the mafia, I'm going to come clean. They keep pulling me back in, right? And then at some point, there's no going back, right? Because you can't ever confess once it gets that big.
And you believe that you believe you can fix it. You believe you can make it work. You can make it right.
And I do wonder if he might have gotten away with it forever had it not been for the 08, 09 meltdown, in which then, that's when it all blew up in his face.
Unless there was some type of event that would have created people wanting to withdraw money all at the same time. Unless that had happened, maybe he would have been able to keep it going, because a Ponzi operates on your ability to find new people to feed into the scheme. So maybe it could have gone on, until his death, perhaps.
Yeah, because on all these documentaries about it, they interview a lot of the people that lost money, but they all said, well, I was making tons of money. He was sending me checks every month. It was great. And this went on for years. So why would they suspect otherwise? And if you don't ask too many questions because the money's coming in, why would you bother?
Yeah, and probably everyone didn't have that success. Maybe just a few had that success. I'm sure just from listening to and reading about various victims over the years, there are people that did have questions that were unanswered, or they were too scared to ask a question because they were too scared to be kicked out of the Madoff love. So everyone didn't benefit, but those that were making money, they could have been the early ones. But what if you weren't one of those people? I'm sure you were scared to ask, or you were negatively impacted.
And that was called an affinity scam because he was Jewish and there was a lot of Jewish clients. And there was kind of a sense, well, he wouldn't cheat one of his own, right? So you lower your trust guard there.
Oh, yeah, you do. You see that a lot in religious organizations. Churches are very good breeding grounds for affinity fraud because, you have this trust automatically with people. And that's what makes you vulnerable. And so there's a vulnerability that's automatically included in family members, in sorority or fraternity sisters, or, any kindred spirit that you might find. There is something that allows you to lower your guard. And we all have people and organizations like that in our lives.
In a way, I think, Kelly, you have to do that because who has time to fact check everything you come across? Right. So we have to trust institutions and authorities for the most part.
Well, yes, and we do have to trust, but we do also have to take a little bit of time to do just a little bit of due diligence. For example, let's go back to the Dixon fraud and Rita Crunwell. Rita worked for the city and owned 400 horses.
Quarter horses, expensive quarter horses.
So, does that even add up? Or you think about when you read a lot of the frauds, especially Ponzi schemes, people are living extremely lavish lifestyles, seems almost outsized lifestyles. And you have to ask yourself, does that add up? So I'm not saying just trust blindly, but there's a little bit of due diligence that we all have to do. I'll give you an example, and I think this is in the book, but just an example, just a basic human example of watching behavior when a fire alarm goes off. You notice what happens when a fire alarm goes off in any public space. What do you think people do when they hear a fire alarm? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. Right. Because we've been conditioned to believe it's a false alarm. A fire alarm means fire, right? And if you're on the 12th floor of a business or of a building and you hear the fire alarm and you're just sitting, why? We become conditioned. So I think that there's a level of due diligence we all need to do. And I'm not saying that you can't trust anyone, but there's just a little bit that we have to do. And we often don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. How can you justify, I'm going to sit on the 60th floor and the fire alarm's going off, and I'm just going to assume without any evidence that it's a false alarm? It's not safe.
Right. So what was the excuses she gave, or the reasons she gave for how she was able to own all those horses? That she was like ex-boyfriend died and left her money or something like that. Yeah,
that she had an investor in her ranches, which she could have. Or she had received dividends from stock that her family had invested, which, things that you can't prove that you just have to accept. But, what happens around people that control the finances is there is a lot of trust placed with them. And we're just we're in a society that we don't like to talk about money. We don't feel comfortable with it. And so when we find somebody that's good with spreadsheets, that's good with managing money, we let them be. We're happy that they're there, that they love that, and we leave them alone. And so when you look at a lot of the research, it's why a lot of frauds happen around and to or are committed by accounting finance professionals because they have access and they're typically left alone. And so Rita didn't have to lie too much or hide too much. It was pretty out in the open because no one else cared. No one else looked at the finances like she did.
Right. You make the point that most people are not that interested in bookkeeping, accounting, finances, money,
but you
taxes.
Should be.
Yeah.
But you should be.
Well, this is the point of your work, I think, is to say, look, trust is all well and good, but there's a non-trivial percentage of the population that will cheat the system if they can.
Right. And you don't want to be on the receiving end of being cheated. There's a story in the book about the West family. And this was a family that was victimized by a financial advisor. And Mrs. West was an elderly woman, and her family had owned land in Asheville, North Carolina, and generations of land. And so they decided that they were going to sell the land. And I believe they received around a little under between $8 and $9 million, which is a lot of money. You know, I'd be very happy if that happened. And so they divided the money up amongst herself and her children, and they invested it with a financial advisor. And they did all their due diligence that they thought they should do. But the only thing that was odd to them was the reports came on really thick paper, almost like a wedding invitation. And that was a red flag that they never really followed up on, but it was a red flag. I mean, just think about when you get financial documents or financial notifications, they're never pretty. You know, they're never on just like heavy card stock. They're typically on just like a basic piece of cheap little paper, right? They're never beautiful. And so that was her only red flag. And then fast forward several months, and they get a call from the FBI saying that, I'm sorry, but this financial advisor has stolen all your money. And they're like, well, are we going to get it back? Of course, you're going to help me get it back. And they were like, no. So these stories are, they're important to share. And, you know, since the book has come out, the amount of people that have reached out to me sharing their story. I have an elderly couple that called me in my office that I owe a call back today about they've been victimized. They're in this scam and they don't know what to do. How can I help? And so they were reading the book and probably identified with Mrs. West and her story, because sometimes people do their due diligence, but there's always something that just sort of shows its ugly head and you didn't follow up on it, and then you become a victim. So I think it's important for us to pay attention to those red flags that are waving in our faces all the time.
So what do you recommend if somebody like the whistleblower in the Dixon case comes across something, or they're just suspicious, or how does she afford all those horses? You want to be a nice fellow worker and not just go, hey, what are you doing to get those horses? So what do you recommend that somebody ask or do, or how do they even fact check somebody's life?
That's a really a really good question, because I think what you need to do is formulate a question that can be around data and not around emotion. And so a question like, how does she afford this? Or that's more emotionally driven. And when you ask a question personally, then it makes it very harder for you to have access to the data to verify something personally. But you could ask a question of, I was at a town meeting and I was looking at our budget, and I was at the neighboring town, which was Sterling, Illinois, and I was looking at that budget, and they have the same population that we have. They have the same annual budget that we have, but yet we're at a deficit. We have the same amount of annual visitors to our town that they have. Something is not right. And who are the people that are associated around this that we can start asking questions? That's a different kind of question. So I think that the types of questions that you should formulate should be around data and evidence that you can prove. And a lot of times when we're suspicious, our suspicions are around emotions, and emotions are harder to prove, but the data always speaks. So that would be my piece of advice, is to make sure that there is data or evidence that can support what you're saying so that people will listen to you.
I always just assumed these cities and municipalities and so forth had multiple checks and balances to prevent all of this. Maybe they do on paper and it's just not enforced because people don't want to do it.
Think about this. There is a reason why there is city council meetings. There's a reason why those meetings are televised. But you and I both know attendance is low. This is not, we might vote, but then we just relinquish all power to someone else. So that city council meeting, the posting of those financials, is the checks and balances that we just overlook and don't do. And so we have as a citizen, we have a fiduciary responsibility to act upon information that is publicly available, that it's our money, but we don't do that. So the checks and balances are there. We just don't check and balance.
I see. Right.
I mean, I'm guilty of it. I don't want anyone to think I'm calling you out. I can count the number of times. I live in a village outside of, not a village, but it's like the village. That's what like the village of Oak Park is what we call it. But I don't go to a ton of town meetings. So I don't want you to think I'm calling anybody else out. But
right.
if there was money missing in my town, I have to take some accountability to that. You know, I am a CPA. I understand financial matters. I know how to read a financial statement. I know what should be there and what shouldn't be there. I know to ask questions. So if I'm not going and there's money missing, then there's a responsibility that I gave up.
Let's explore different bins of kinds of perpetrators. So the Bernie Madoffs, let's just say there's 1 to 3% of the population are psychopaths. They're the dark triad, they're Machiavellian, they're psychopathic, and they're narcissistic. And we'll always have that small percentage. We'll never eliminate all of them. Are they different than just the average person that maybe steals a pen or Post-it notes or takes $100 here or there? Is that a different kind of person?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we're all, and we have to be honest with ourselves, I think we all are on a spectrum of narcissism. We're on a spectrum of overconfidence. We're on a spectrum of arrogance. Now, we might not be psychopathic. We might not be that. But, you know, there's a natural amount of arrogance and narcissism you have to have in order to function as a professional, especially in corporate America. Like if you are any leader of any group or team, there's a level of arrogance that you have to display in order to just make it. You know, if you're trying to be an author to write a book, there's a little level of arrogance that you think you got to have it just to get that out there and say, hey, I'm writing this and I want the world to read it and I'm telling you something. So we all have it. I think that there's not a big difference between the person that can fudge on their timesheet or go on a work trip and take their whole family and do no work and you go to the amusement park the whole time or the beach. I mean, there's not a big difference, except sometimes a person that might be a little bit more narcissistic may turn it into a pattern. So they may do it more frequently. But, you know, we're all on a spectrum of those things. And so I think it would be professionally dishonest to say that most of my colleagues don't have some level of narcissism, because they would have to in order to stand up, to defend a dissertation, to become get a PhD, to teach, you know, and say, I am the leader of you. Listen to me because I know best. So it's sort of built into who we are as professionals. Now, some people have more of it, but that's sort of my opinion of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
and I don't mind saying it. I don't mind saying it.
Oh, no. It's, ego. Think of it as ego. You got to have some ego strength to do anything, right? So
absolutely.
I mean, narcissism is maybe not the right word. Maybe that's for the extreme version. For some of these lower grade fraud people, would it be justified that the company's just not paying me what I'm worth, or they build into this kind of extra perks that I should get, and so I take the family on the vacation and on the work vacation, or whatever, and I charge the entire dinner to the company rather than just my share, something like that. And then in their mind, what are they thinking? Well, you know, everybody does it. I'm underpaid anyway. This is part of the job.
This is owed to me. So I think that can be the culture that the employee can have. But then we have to think about speaking to the employers. What environment are you creating that makes a person feel that they need to do that? And so we as employers need to be aware of that. Are we overworking people? Maybe we are. Are we not rewarding them enough? Maybe we do that. So if you create environments like that, people will take what they believe is owed to them. And so my message is, let's not create those environments, because people will do that. You know, if there's a way to take advantage of a system, because a person feels overworked and underappreciated, the first opportunity that they have to do that, they will do it. Or the first opportunity they have to not share something with you that could be detrimental to your organization, they won't share it. They might not do anything bad, but they also may not report anything either. So both of those outcomes is what you don't want as an employer.
Yeah, Phil Zimbardo calls this the Lucifer effect, where he puts more emphasis on the bad apple barrels rather than bad apples. And he used like Enron as an example, where you just have this corrupt corporate environment where everybody in the company is doing whatever they got to do to make money and so forth. There, it would be hard for a single whistleblower to do anything, right? When the entire environment is leaning toward that. It'd be like a sports team or something where everybody, well, I'll give this example later in more detail, but where everybody's doping in the entire sport, in my sport of cycling. Well, okay, so you can't exactly point to this athlete or that athlete, well, they're cheaters. Well, the whole system is corrupt.
Yeah, but let's not minimize the power of one voice, because one voice can rock an entire system. I mean, I think you saw that with the Wirecard fraud. There was Pav Gill was the Wirecard whistleblower, and Wirecard was another example of a very corrupt environment. Employees were doing all kinds of things. They were creating fictitious contracts. They would have logos that they were put on the contracts. Like, they were just going crazy. And his voice is the one that led to the investigation. So I don't want us to minimize the power of one, because if that corrupt environment is corrupt enough, and you can shine a flashlight that is bright enough to show something egregious enough, people will listen. And so that's, I think, why the role of the whistleblower is so critical, and creating the environment where we are embracing someone's ability to come forward is so important, because one person can turn a whole ship around. And we don't think that. And I think, some of the commentary you were saying, like, a lot of people might think, what can my one voice do? I mean, if everybody's doing it, then can I really win? Why would I even speak up? Because it's going to be more detrimental to me, because no one's going to listen to me. Maybe not, maybe not.
But what if you're in on it, you've benefited from the fraud, and then at some point you cross the moral line and decide,
now.
But if I speak up, I'm going to go down with everybody else, and I don't want to do that.
That is, that's a dilemma. And so in the book, I talk about crossovers. And so you might be an accidental perpetrator or a righteous perpetrator, and you crossed over to that whistleblower category because you have crossed that moral line. So that can happen, but be careful not to venture into that perpetrator category, because it's hard to shake it. Once your name's on that dotted line, it's hard to shake that.
Does law enforcement or the legal system allow for some of that? Like, they'll cut a plea deal with you. If you come clean and tell us how the system works, we'll let you off easy.
Well, yeah, I think they play a role, but an insider is very important to an investigation. I mean, if you think about it, if you have inside information and you have crossed over, you are a critical tool to righting a wrong or fixing a system. So am I mad that this person now has a incentive? I think it depends on how egregious the claim is. We think about frauds in different categories as being bad or good. When we're talking just money, everybody's like, oh yeah, you lost millions of dollars, no big deal. But when we start talking about safety, then we have a whole different ballgame that we're talking about. So if we're talking about the safety of cars or the safety of airplanes or our drinking water, you want every whistleblower to speak up because it affects you. But when we just talk about money and somebody else's money, we don't always associate ourselves with their success. So when we think about something else that could be more universal, we want every whistleblower to speak up. So that crossover, that person that knows the inside, and maybe they were in on it at some point, but if there was an insider that knew the Boeing airplane cover up, and they decided, I'm now on the other side. I want to expose what I know because people could die. We want that person. We want that person to speak up because you or I could be on that Boeing plane the next day. Your family could be on that Boeing plane the next day. So it's interesting how our views of people change when we think it could affect us. And I think when we just talk about money, we don't always think about it affecting us personally. But when we talk about universal things, food, travel, cars, we're just like, oh, where are the whistleblowers? We want all of them to speak up if they say something or if they see something.
So you put a number on like 1.5 trillion, whatever it was. Yeah, trillion. How do you know? I mean, if so much of this happens under the radar, and how reliable is the data?
I keep up with that statistic, and the estimate right now is I was working on a paper for a publication, and the estimate that I put in that is around 5.1 trillion. And so, again, you're exactly right, because so much goes unreported. So how can you quantify it totally? But 5.1 trillion is a big number. So, so let's assume that's a conservative number, which is still a lot. So, but we don't know, because just imagine that there's 50, 60% of fraud and crimes that go unreported, and probably large ones.
And a lot of the victims are hesitant to speak up, you mentioned, because it's embarrassing.
Well, yeah, who wants to say I was defrauded? Who wants to say, I mean, you think about some of the romance scams that have happened, and if some of those, who really wants to say that I dated a person online that I never met and I sent them millions and millions of dollars? Who wants to tell that story? Not anybody.
Right.
But it happens. It happens. Yeah. It happens. So there's a level of embarrassment, I think, that's associated with some crime.
Did you see that Netflix series, The Tinder Swindler?
I did. And I'm just like, honey,
I know, but let me just give a different perspective. Tell me what you think. Okay, so the women are made to look kind of gullible, but I got to thinking about it, so if this guy takes you out and you're actually on his private jet, you're on the plane, and you go to this island, you stay at this 5-star resort, and it's great, and you spend some time with them, that's a lot of cues of, well, I guess it must be real. I should trust him. I met the guy.
Michael, let me tell you.
I'm on his plane.
There's something. Let me tell you. There's something off. I mean, there will be something off in that. And just like, you might get away with it once, but you won't get away with it multiple times if all of it is false, if all of it is fake, if it's not your plane, if you can't afford the hotel, if you don't really have the clout that you have. You might be able to put things together one time, but multiple times? Nah.
Well, he did this
I'm too much of a skeptic to.
Well, good. I will give you an honorary membership to the Skeptic Society. But is the way it worked was the money he got from the previous woman, he then plowed into the next one. So he rented the plane again based on the money he got the previous woman to send him. And it took like months and months, tons of emails and texts, and I love you, and this is it. You're the one. We're going to have a family.
Michael, I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
I've been talking to you for 34 minutes. Would you send me $5,000 if I asked you to?
No.
Okay. You wouldn't, right? You wouldn't. And, what would I have to say to you to get you to send me $5,000 just out of the blue? And you send it to me every month. What would I have to say to you to get you to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. Yeah. Because in this particular case, he did a lot of foreign business trips, and then he would call them and go, oh gosh, I'm in trouble and I need $10,000 at that moment.
Come on.
At that moment, you're saying that their red alarm should have gone off.
I'm just going to use you and I as an example. When we hang up from this meeting today, a week from now, I call you, Michael. I'm stuck in Nebraska, and there are no rental cars, and the only thing I can do is do a private car, and it's going to be $8,000. Could you please lend me that? Remember, I did that podcast interview with you. Mm-hmm. You give me $8,000, I'll give it back to you. Come on, Michael, you would.
That's funny. I have a couple of good stories for you. So a couple years ago, I got when I had done a couple of TED Talks, and I got an invitation from a university in England. Saw your TED Talk. We'd love to have you come speak, what's your fee? So I just gave some big number because that usually comes back down and so on. And he just said, yes, that's fine. I'm like, huh, okay. So then, a couple more emails, and there was some, there's like a lot of all caps in the letter. It's like, all right, this is looking pretty bad. So then I figured out, okay, this is a scam. So what's the scam, right? So I went along with it just to see what he's going to ask for. And at some point it was, okay, before we send you the first half of your fee, we need you to get the certificate for terrorism, that you're allowed to come to the UK and that you're cleared, you're not a terrorist. I'm like, okay, all right. So then I had my art department at Skeptic actually make up a certificate that, Michael Shermer has been cleared of all terrorists, and so on. He's legitimate. So I did that and I sent it to him. He's like, oh, no, that's the wrong one. You have to do it through this department and it's $1,500. I went, there it is.
There it is. So then you send your $1,500 and boom, they've taken your money. That's a good scam though. But like you said, the all caps, the university that maybe you had heard of, maybe not, but you could have easily called that university and been like, department chair, or is this event happening? Like there's ways, but sometimes the con artist is feeding into a person that they think we are. So, it's prestigious for you to be invited to an international location and do a talk. You've done a TED talk. This is probably something that's appealing to you. He'll probably take the bait. So
then it turns out, since you've done TED Talks, you'll appreciate this. He went through the list of TED Talk speakers, and because I wasn't the only one, as it turns out, I emailed a few of the other TED Talkers that I knew, and they went, "Yep, we got that invitation." That's good, right? So, how does identity theft work? Like, if somebody I have not had this bad experience, but if somebody got my Social Security number, what could they do?
Oh. Everything. I mean, that could have a field day with your Social Security number. Open credit cards. If they have your social, then there's belief that then they may be able to create a fake driver's license too. So there may be the ability to apply for loans. So there's a lot that can happen if someone gets your Social Security number is probably on the dark web anyway, all of us. So we just hope that we're just not picked or sold to someone that they want to create a credit card. But there's so much damage that can happen when your identity is stolen. And the bad part about it is when your identity is stolen, all of the responsibility is on the victim. And that doesn't always feel great because you're spending months, could be years, clearing your name because your credit could be ruined. So, identity theft is, I think years ago, it was more talked about than it is now, because now we just put all of our information on social. So it's easy. We tell where we're going on vacation. We tell when it's our kids' birthdays. We tell how old our kids are. We tell when it's our birthday. We tell when it's our anniversary. We tell our parents' name. We tell where we're from. So identity theft is like table stakes now. I mean, it's easy to do that because you could be me and mimic me or you easily.
And so if somebody wants that, they go to the dark web. What is that? Where is that? How do they find these?
So there's a gentleman, he's in my book, Brett Johnson. My students love Brett. He's just one of these just dynamic speakers, and he's known as the godfather of internet fraud. And so he comes to my class and he somehow, I don't know how to access the dark web because I'm not a reformed cyber criminal, but he goes on the dark web and he'll say, somebody give me a name, and it might be the student's name or their parent's name. And he'll put their name in, he'll show all of their information that is on the dark web for sale for maybe $2.99. It could have your social, your driver's license number. It has it could have where you bank, your home address, any properties that you've owned. Like, a lot of information about us is publicly available, but the dark web makes it nice and neat so they can package and you can buy information about people. So he shows my students how to do it. Now, I've never been on the dark web. I've seen him go on the dark web because I think I'm too scared to do that. But, there is like this secret society for crime. And we are there unwillingly. Our information is there. And so it's one of the reasons why we have to be so diligent about when we see a credit card application in the mail that we didn't apply for, call and find out what's going on. Because for all you know, there's been a credit card opened in your name. I used to get these student loan calls all the time. And like, Kelly, we can help you relieve you of your student loan. I didn't have a student loan. So like, it's on me to now call back and say, what is this? Has somebody opened something in my name? Not to ignore it, because I know I never had a student loan. So those are the kinds of things that I think we don't always follow up on as victims, because it's time consuming and we're busy, but we have to. We just have to.
If you've been a victim and your credit score goes down, there's the 3 big credit agencies. Why can't you just call them up and go, look, here's the evidence I was scammed. Please put my number back up where it belongs. And I've heard stories that they just don't respond, or it's like calling the IRS. You're not going to get anybody. Or
that whole process, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand the process as to why, if you have evidence, why that can't be, why you can't be reinstated to where you were. I don't know. And that again is a hole in the process, and why I think try not to get to that point, because, it's almost like a point of no return if that does happen to you, because you're almost defenseless and you don't want to end up there.
Okay, whistleblower laws, that they've gotten much better over the decades, right? Their whistleblowers are protected more or less, or not so much?
In theory, yes. When I did my TED Talk was entitled my first TED Talk. So I started out as a TEDx talk, and then it was elevated to a TED Talk. But my first title was Why Do We Hate Whistleblowers? And then when TED took it over and it became promoted to an official TED Talk, the title I changed to How Whistleblowers Shape History. And in theory, yes, the law protects whistleblowers. But really what I'm speaking to is the unspoken law, the law in the streets. What do we actually think about whistleblowers, and how do we actually treat them, and what do we actually think of them? We want the information from them, but we don't really trust them. And should that actually be the dynamic? So that was my reason for wanting to promote and talk about the various types of whistleblowers, because I think this idea of snitches and rats and tattletales, there's an element of that in a vigilante whistleblower. And a vigilante whistleblower, they're tough. They're like, if I see it and it's wrong, I'm saying something. And so that is a vigilante whistleblower. But there are other 2 categories, an accidental whistleblower and a noble whistleblower. They don't always identify as being a whistleblower. They are doing their job and they stumble upon something and they report. That's an accidental whistleblower. And a noble whistleblower is somebody that doesn't turn a blind eye like their other team members might turn, and they report. And so they don't understand why everyone's turned against them, because everybody should have reported what they've seen. And so I wanted to try to change the narrative somewhat around this idea of hating and being distrusting of the people that are really trying to save us and share information that's very vital to us.
Well, the whistleblower as a snitch is true if the entire system is corrupt and everybody's in on it, and then somebody decides to blow the whistle, right? So this is the omerta rule in the mafia. Everybody is one of the criminals, so you can't really blow the whistle.
That's true. Mafia's a little different because they operate under a whole different system. So I think the point you made is very valid. The system is corrupt. So stepping out to blow the whistle on a corrupt system that you've involved yourself in, I don't know how you then become a whistleblower. When you cross over that line of moral, you're now this moral person, but you're a mafia. I don't know. I'm still a little scared of the mafia. So
I'll give you some detailed examples, since I mentioned cycling and the doping problem. You're probably vaguely aware of this, and something about Lance Armstrong and so forth. You probably can't even name the other people that doped in the sport. But the entire sport was pretty corrupt in the 1990s and 2000s, and who knows, maybe it still is. But when EPO was invented by Amgen, it's a drug that triggers your body to produce more red blood cells. Great for anemia for cancer patients and so on. but also great for endurance athletes because you're pumping more red blood cells into the muscles that carry oxygen and so on. So it entered the sport in the early 90s, and everybody was doing it. We don't know exactly, but like 90%, something like that. And so by the time Lance Armstrong entered the sport in the late 90s, everybody was doing it, and he was getting his ass kicked. And he basically said, what is going on here? And then everybody told him, everybody's doing EPO. You got to do it. Okay. So he did. And he hired the best blood doping doctor, this Michele Ferrari, and said, all right, you're going to work for the postal team exclusively. You're the best. We'll get the money. We'll pay you. And he did. And, he won 7 tours, right? So what brought him down, though, was a whistleblower, one of his fellow teammates, a guy named Floyd Landis, who himself was busted. So Floyd had been a loyal teammate to Lance for many years. And then Lance retired in 2005. And then Floyd won the Tour de France in 2006. And then he tested positive. It was busted and served his 2 years. And in that interim, he wrote a book that he was innocent, and he did fundraisers. He raised millions of dollars in his defense. He was a Quaker, so he had his whole hometown. Oh, poor Floyd, he's been wrongly accused. And so then it came out he was a total doper. And in fact, it came out everybody on the podium with Lance for all 7 of those tours, they all doped. Every one of them. And so this is why none of them are claiming, now that he's been stripped of his titles, that they deserve those titles, because they know they don't. Right? That they were all doping. So he won sort of fair and square, or whatever term you want to use. But
yeah, it's funny.
He really did. Okay, so what happened is Floyd served his time. He did his 2 years. He came back, and no one would hire him because he'd been busted, and it also lied in the book, and it was just terrible. So he lost everything. He had nothing. His wife left him, and he lost his home and couldn't get a job. He had no education. So he called Lance and said, and this is during Lance's comeback. In 2009 and 10, he was on Radio Shack and said, can I be on your team? I just want to be a bike racer. I got nothing. I'll carry your water bottles. I'll just be a good domestique. I just want to be a regular bike racer. And Lance said, no. And at that point, Floyd said, fuck it. I'm just going to the authorities. They're after him anyway. I know where all the bodies are buried. I'll tell them everything we did. And he did. And that's what brought Lance down, is that inside whistleblower.
So all Lance had to do was give him a spot on it, just help him.
Yeah.
And he would have kept quiet.
The Omerta rule would have held up, right? And it's like, wow, okay. So it wasn't the doping that brought him in, because they were all doping, right? It was just that one. So, is he a hero? Floyd, not really. I mean, okay, he was a whistleblower, but come on. Look at all the stuff
he was a whistleblower because he didn't get what he wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, he probably would be a little more on the vigilante side.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of that.
Because he's a little rogue, right? So he's a little more of the vigilante, because he didn't have to do that. He did it for sort of personal gain, just to sort of ruffle the feather a little bit, and he did. But I will put him probably in the vigilante category.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that section of your book, because there are people, you have to watch out for that, right? Why is this person blowing the whistle? Are they pissed off at this person they're blowing the whistle at?
And they can be. Sometimes they can be. And so that's, I think, what separates out the vigilante from those other 2 categories, because sometimes people are just out to get somebody or a process. So yes, you're right. And that's a perfect example of someone who, he's a whistleblower, but he has an asterisk by his name, because his intention really wasn't because of exposing doping. That wasn't his intention.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So legally and accounting wise, when big fraud happens, how much of the money can be recovered? I think you said in Dixon, they got 40 of the 55 million back.
They did, which is a lot. Like that's a big recovery. But, a lot of these cases, money is spent. And when money is spent and assets are seized and auctioned, there's not a lot of money in recovery. So that's why it can be very detrimental to medium and small businesses, because you're not seeing that money again. It's gone. So don't think that there's going to be a big payday at the end. You're done. And so that's part of the message too.
That was funny in your documentary. There's that guy explaining where a lot of the money went into the horse's mouth and out the other end.
Yeah, that's true. That's Jason Modillo. I love when he says that. You're right.
Yeah. So, right. Well, so the whistleblower thing is crucial. I mean, most scientific fraud, which I've studied a little bit, is exposed by graduate students that are in the lab. They see what the professor's doing or what, some of the other grad students are doing. And, it really does take those insiders.
It does. It takes the insiders to expose. And, depending on what they're seeing, we might want the exposure, like if it is a cure for Alzheimer's and an academic doctor is lying about those results or those findings, we want that grad student to report that and expose that. So again, it really depends on what it is.
Yeah. There was an interesting case with David Baltimore. He was the president of Caltech for years, and he was one of the discoverers of the HIV virus and the retrovirus drugs and all that stuff. Big guy. He was accused of fraud back when he was working on the retroviruses, and he was investigated and and was acquitted because if you look into any scientist's lab data, it's pretty messy. It never looks like what it does in the final published paper, right? Where everything is perfectly laid out. It's pretty messy. And if you look at any scientist's lab, you're going to find, errors here and there. But what acquitted David Baltimore was that his errors were kind of all over the map. They weren't, pointing in one direction to support a particular theory or hypothesis. And that's how one way fraud is determined, is if all your mistakes go in one direction. Like this is what brought David Irving down in his lawsuit against Deborah Lipstadt for calling him a Holocaust denier. And he goes, I'm just a historian. And so he sued her for libel. And in the libel trial, she hired Richard Evans, who's the leading historian of the Second World War and the Nazis. And he turned his graduate students over into everything David Irving ever wrote, all his footnotes and everything, and found errors all over the place. And Irving said, hey, all historians make errors. Yeah, but yours all go in one direction, exonerating Hitler and Himmler and the Nazis and so on. And that's an example of fraud. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Great story.
Yeah, because I assume accounting can be messy too. It's complicated.
It can be, but one thing that's nice about accounting is everything sort of has to balance. So if you lie in one place, you got to lie in a couple other places to make it all work out in the end. And so that's why I think a lot of times when you see accounting fraud, you'll see the next couple of questions, where were the auditors? Because it's so hard to pull it off. Because in accounting, we talk about something called the accounting equation. Assets equals liabilities plus stockholders' equity. It's a nice mathematical equation that has to balance. So if you take something out of one side, what are you putting on or taking out of that other side so it balances? So there's lies all over the place. You got to keep the lie going. So that's why I think we should be able to, at some point when we are using AI to look at all of the data or make predictions, we'll be able to hopefully minimize or eliminate fraud from happening in business transactions. Hopefully.
But what was the famous accounting firm in the Enron case?
Arthur Andersen.
Arthur Andersen, right. How come they didn't figure that out? Or what brought them
There's
down?
so many, there's so many reasons. But I'll say that when you are client serving and you have a fiduciary responsibility to the public, you have a natural conflict. And so independence is an issue in that we talk about in accounting. But when you are client serving, so Arthur Andersen was trying to serve Enron, and they wanted to keep the client. They wanted to keep that's big dollars coming into that office, the Houston office. But do you really want to deliver bad news? Because they'll fire you in a heartbeat. So, it's this dilemma of how do you keep your client happy, but at the same time, tell them what they need to tell them or direct them in the way that they need to be directed. That's the conflict, and that's the dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the section on noble whistleblowers, what came to mind was Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. Are they noble whistleblowers? What is your opinion of that?
Well, hear me out now. Ed Snowden is actually in the righteous perpetrator category in that chapter.
Oh,
so this is,
right.
Snowden's an interesting one because, there was two camps around Snowden. Some people call him a whistleblower. Others call him a perpetrator. And so I think he fits so nicely in that righteous perpetrator category because were laws broken? They were. However, Was he trying to expose something because he believed it was better for society to know what was going on? That's the righteousness aspect of him. So I think he is the quintessential righteous perpetrator, because it's really hard to call a whistleblower if they've broken laws. Now, whether we agree with the law or not, that's a whole nother conversation. But, was a law broken? Yes. And so, a lot of times you don't see a ton of people that hold the title of whistleblowers that are also lawbreakers. You might not agree with the law. That's a whole nother conversation, but.
Right. So there are ways to change the laws politically, and that's not the
Sure,
job of the
absolutely.
That's not the job of the whistleblower. So that would be more of a perpetrator thing. And Julian Assange, I assume, maybe not even a noble, or
he might be in the righteous perpetrator category too. Maybe so. I think so. I mean, but that's the creation of that category, I think, is perfect for these people that we have this conflict over, because there is information that they are sharing that does benefit an aspect of society, and they have to break laws in order to do that. And so where do they fit in this role? I don't think Snowden did what he did for greed. Okay. I don't think that was his motivation, but he broke a law. So that's why I was really thoughtful about parsing out these different types of perpetrators, because everyone is not Madoff. Madoff broke the law for greed. I mean, period. He lived a lavish lifestyle. He preyed on the people that were in his close-knit circle. Greed, greed, greed all day. He is very different than Snowden. So let's make sure we understand their differences. And I think it's important to do that.
I've seen some discussions of late of Daniel Ellsberg, who apparently is terminally ill now, and kind of reflecting on his life and career. Yeah, as a the Pentagon Papers guy, right? So, but there the distinction was he took them to the New York Times, who are going to carefully vet what they publish to make sure they're not giving away names of operatives in foreign countries that are helping us, that kind of thing, which Snowden and apparently Julian Assange especially were not very discriminating about, right? So did cause problems for the State Department and did cause problems for our allies, in addition to breaking laws. So that, I guess the distinction might be Ellsberg is more of a noble whistleblower than a perpetrator.
Absolutely. It's the law-breaking component of it that puts you in that perp category. I just think that we have to embrace and honor our whistleblowers. And so giving anybody the name of whistleblower that broke a law, I think does the whole whistleblower category a disservice. So that's why I think putting them over in the perp category is appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then recall Nixon famously went to the Supreme Court and asked them to block the publication. And they said, nope, that's a free speech thing. The New York Times could do that. So nothing illegal there. That cleared them.
Nope. So you can be a whistleblower. You can be a noble whistleblower.
Yeah.
In my book, you can be a noble whistleblower.
Right. Okay. So when a company calls you in and says, help us, we want to make sure we're not being defrauded. Oh, I had one quick question on your accounting thing, back to that bigger issue. How is it that these big corporations, they have their quarterly reports and they go, oh my God, we had no idea. We lost $200 million this quarter. How did this happen? So is it just they're so big and complex, it takes a team of accountants and it takes them 3 months to figure it out, and then it's just not clear? Nobody can see the loss?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between cash and revenue, okay? And there's a difference between cash basis accounting and accrual basis accounting. And so a lot of big companies are reporting their financial statements using accrual basis accounting, which means revenue is recognized when it's earned, regardless of when cash is received, and expenses are recognized when they're incurred, regardless of when they are paid. So you can have you can show revenue and have very low on cash. You can have that discrepancy. That was sort of the Enron problem, because they were booking revenue and never actually received the cash, or those business that those contracts never came about. And so I think that's one of the reasons that that a company can show one day and say, oh, we have 200 million in loss. there's often a delay in the financial statements because accounting is based on historical information. And so it's sort of this fight between the accounting people and the finance people, because the finance people are a little bit more reporting up to date in real time, and accounting is always reporting in historical matters. So it's it can happen because there can be a delay. So I'm giving you like intermediate accounting in like two minutes, but it can happen. It does happen. It's not that there is any fraud or manipulation. It's just sort of the way generally accepted accounting principles are written and governed.
Yeah, and it's like on the whole issue of income inequality and what's fair in paying taxes in these major corporations like Google and Apple and so on that don't pay nearly a percentage of taxes that the rest of us do, and so on. And they have teams of accountants and they're following the law, right? This is legal to, park your money offshore and so forth. So there, I guess you would say probably that has to change politically from the top.
Sure. And the tax code is now the tax code is a whole nother animal. And, you pay firms to find and show and legally manipulate the tax code.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I was going to tell you a story about sovereign citizens. Let's see, this is in my conspiracy book here. I testified as an expert witness in a Oregon case of a guy named Miles Jewison, who was convicted for tax fraud, 1099 OID tax fraud, which I never heard of. Have you heard of this? 1099 OID, like you deeply discount property investments in the future and you take the loss now. And this guy had, let's see, I think the IRS sent him a refund. Yeah, $411,773, which was legal. And he spent it on a home loan, credit card bills, a Mercedes-Benz, and a boat. Probably you shouldn't spend your tax return on stuff that's really obvious like that. Emboldened by his success, the next year, Jewison reported $2.3 million in interest income and demanded a refund of $1.5 million. This time, however, instead of a refund check, he got an IRS investigation, landed him in court. Turns out he was a sovereign citizen. He doesn't believe the United States government is even legitimate, and that you don't have to pay taxes, you don't have to have a driver's license, you don't recognize any state police or federal agents, nothing, right? And so I was basically, for the defense, saying, does he really believe this? And the answer is, yeah, these people really believe it. Right, so I want to ask about just cults in general. I'm fond of saying no one joins a cult, they join a group that they think is good. No one joins a Bernie Madoff fraud scheme. They join a group that they think is going to make them money. Right, so it's back to that gullibility. How do we default to trust and we're gullible, or are we naturally skeptical? I think you would say we need to be more naturally skeptical.
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe channel our inner skeptic more rather than suppress it.
And it also depends on what you want the outcome to be. So if your goal is 40% return, and as crazy as that sounds, if that's what your goal is, you're going to believe that and you're going to support that. So it's going to be hard for you to be a skeptic over an outcome you really, really want, even if it sounds ridiculous. And so, but we have to be. Our inner skeptic has to always show its ugly head.
Yeah, right. Okay, back to my question on, so corporation brings you in, what can we do to make sure we're not getting ripped off from our own people from within?
Well, it depends, because I often am talking about what are all the red flags missed? Have you hacked your system to figure out what the openings are? And hacking your system is a fancy way for saying, ask your employees, how could they do it? Is it possible for you to find a vendor that could be a friend, set your vendor up with your company and funnel business to them and they give you a kickback? Is that possible? Like, just ask people how it could happen in the organization. And then when you get that laundry list of things, fix it. So a lot of times it's just more of an awareness kind of situation. Now, back in my years ago, I would do fraud investigations because I was a forensic accountant with KPMG. And so that was a whole different process. Now it's mostly I'll be brought in to do fraud awareness workshops and talk about cases of, what was missed, what could have been improved, and how are you creating a culture of a speak up culture and how you do that. So But it really depends on what the motive is of the company, because a lot of times they never want a fraud to happen. So I tend to be more preventative than reactionary, because if there's a fraud, you're probably talking to the FBI, So I come in, I'm sharing why you should care, why you should be preventative, why I am like your insurance policy. You should do this first before you have to respond to a claim. So that's sort of my role.
I would definitely hire you. It reminds me of my favorite Spielberg movie, Catch Me If You Can, about Frank Abagnale Jr. That's such a classic. But the IRS or whoever, the FBI, hired him to help them figure out how other criminals operate, because he's thought about it.
Yeah,
do companies do that? Does the FBI do that?
Sometimes. I think sometimes. Because I think learning from the mistakes of others is valuable for an employee population, for sure.
Yeah. Well, but you want to hire the guy, like computer companies that hire hackers, right?
Sure.
How could somebody hack our system? You're the guy that does it, right?
So we want you to tell us what you would do. There's also white hat hackers, the good hackers that really show you they can hack, but they're not going to hack and steal. They're going to hack and show you all the openings, all the problems that your system has. So you can hire a white hat hacker.
Right.
Hackers for good.
Hackers for good, right. I also thought, I just remembered a section in your chapter on accidental perpetrators. You used the example of you ordered a purse online and you got a second one. Mm-hmm. Now, that was an accident on their part, and you nobly sent it back, but you didn't have to do that. And probably many people wouldn't do that, right? It's a pain in the neck to have to go down to UPS and send it back and all that stuff. And what's the harm? And, what's the justification? Well, companies have built in, they know errors are made. So it's all kind of accounted for.
That did happen. I did send it back. I didn't want to be an accidental perpetrator, but a lot of people were telling me, you know what, you can keep it. They didn't even know that it came. So, you have to think about what your inner voice, you have to listen to your own inner voice, because if someone found out that I kept this and I sold it, and then the company found out, like, let's play this all out. And the last thing I would want to have to do is explain, oh, no, I didn't get the purse. Well, we have records and a picture that it was delivered. Oh, okay, I did get the purse and I sold it. That would be a really bad story to tell. So I didn't want to do that.
Well, especially because you depend on your reputation for what you do, which would be the exact opposite of...
I'd be writing a different book.
That's right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Just give us kind of a what's next on your writing, research, teaching.
What's next?
Consulting.
Well, let's see. I don't know what's next. I don't know. This is the first time I don't have an answer to that. So I don't have another book that I'm planning to write.
You should do another document. Your documentary was so good. You should
maybe
do
we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do one on Sam Bankman-Fried. Who will see. All
right, here's the book. Fool Me Once. Kelly Richmond Pope. Thank you so much for warning us and elevating our inner skeptics, which I really appreciate.